Loretta Lynn, the coal miner's daughter, built her legacy through raw truth and unforgettable songs. But behind the rhinestones and fame was a mother grieving deeply. Her daughter, Betty Sue, wasn't just her firstborn. She was her friend, her musical partner, and her emotional twin. When Betty Sue died at just 64, it shattered Loretta in a way few ever saw. The cause? Complications from emphysema. But the heartbreak went beyond illness. It was about memories, missed calls, and a bond that could never be replaced. What happened to Loretta Lynn's daughter is more than sad. It's a story that changed her forever. Betty Sue Lynn. When Loretta Lynn gave birth to her first child, Betty Sue, she was just 16 years old and completely unprepared. In her own words, Loretta admitted, "I didn't even know how babies were made." She learned she was pregnant at a doctor's office, stunned and scared. Betty Sue was born on November 26, 1948, while Loretta and her husband, Doolittle Mooney Lynn, were living in Washington. Loretta had expected a boy and had already picked the name Jack. When the nurse told her it was a girl, she cried, not from sadness, but fear that she'd disappointed her husband. But Doolittle told her he was happy either way. That moment bonded Loretta and Betty forever. From the beginning, Betty Sue was more than just Loretta's daughter. She was her emotional anchor. Loretta once said that she could feel Betty's moods in dreams, even when they were miles apart. Betty married young, tying the knot with Paul Markworth while still a teenager. Together, they had two daughters, Lynn and Audrey, giving Loretta her first grandchildren. But beyond motherhood, Betty Sue shared her mother's gift for music. She wrote under the name Tracy Lee and had several of her songs recorded by Loretta. Their musical bond was rare, deep, personal, and full of pride. Tragically, Betty Sue passed away in July 2013 at age 64 due to complications from emphysema. Her death was a crushing blow. Loretta issued a heartfelt tribute, saying, "I still sometimes pick up the phone to call her." She described Betty as a great songwriter and said, "She made me a mom first. Sometimes it felt like we were raising each other." Losing Betty wasn't just about saying goodbye to a child. It was like losing a piece of her own youth, her own journey. In 2021, on what would have been Betty's 73rd birthday, Loretta posted a photo of Betty alongside her late son, Jack, writing, "They were a handful, but we had fun. I had one on each hip. I still can't believe they're both gone." It was a mother's grief, still fresh even after years. Betty's death was more than a loss. It was a reminder that no matter how famous you are, no matter how many songs you write, losing a child is the kind of heartbreak that never really fades. Betty Sue's passing left a hole in Loretta Lynn's heart, but it wasn't the only time she'd face the unbearable loss of a child. Just 1 year after Betty was born, Loretta had another baby, Jack Benny Lynn. His story ended in tragedy too, but in a way so sudden and shocking, it still haunts the Lynn family to this day. Jack Benny Lynn. Loretta Lynn's second child, Jack Benny Lynn, was born on December 7, 1949. She named him after her favorite comedian, but also followed the Southern tradition of giving children two names. From the very start, Jack was different. Quiet, gentle, and deeply in tune with nature, he was Loretta's blonde-headed, blue-eyed baby, just as she'd wished for. He grew up close to his big sister, Betty Sue, and together they kept their young mother constantly on her toes. "They got into everything," Loretta recalled. "I'd do it all again if I could." Jack grew up with a strong sense of responsibility. After high school, he joined the Army. Not out of pressure, but because he didn't want his brother Ernest to outdo him. He married his high school sweetheart, Pat, and they had 2 children, Laura Kay and Jeffrey Allen. Even after the marriage ended, Jack remained devoted to his kids. He worked on the family ranch as a blacksmith and horse trainer. He loved the outdoors, especially horseback riding, and often helped manage the animals on Loretta's land. Loretta called him quiet and tender, the kind of man who didn't need attention to prove his strength. Then, tragedy struck. On July 24, 1984, Jack tried to cross Tennessee's Duck River on horseback, just a few miles from home. Something went wrong. He reportedly hit his head and drowned. Loretta was in an Illinois hospital for exhaustion after a tour. She didn't learn the news until the next day. "It was like the air left the room," she said later. "The grief was overwhelming. I adored him with all my heart. He was a spitting image of his daddy," she wrote years later. And just like that, her strong, quiet son was gone. Even decades later, Loretta kept Jack's memory alive. On his birthday in 2021, she posted, "I've thought of him and missed him every day for 37 years. It was clear that the pain hadn't dulled. It had simply changed form." Jack's death wasn't just tragic, it was unfair. He was doing something he loved. He was close to home. And yet, it all ended in an instant. For Loretta, losing Jack felt like losing part of her foundation. It was another heartbreak in a life already marked by too many. With both her eldest daughter and her gentle-hearted son gone, Loretta had no choice but to carry their memories forward. But even as she grieved, life didn't pause. Her next child, Ernest Ray, brought new joys and new challenges. He would follow her into music, but also stumble into a public struggle that nearly destroyed his future. Ernest Ray Ernie Lynn. Born on May 27, 1951, Ernest Ray Lynn, known by most as Ernie, arrived after Loretta had already suffered 2 painful miscarriages. She was still a teenager and technically a minor. Labor was difficult, and a cesarean section was recommended. But because her husband was away and unreachable, Loretta couldn't legally sign the consent form herself. Against all odds, she delivered Ernie naturally. "He came into the world fighting," she once said. And in many ways, he never stopped. Ernie grew up surrounded by music and found his place as a performer. He often opened for Loretta on the road and appeared on some of her studio recordings. They were close, not just as mother and son, but as creative partners. Loretta was proud of him. "He's got music in his blood," she said. But the road wasn't always smooth. Fame didn't come as easily to Ernie as it had for his mother. And in the early 2000s, his name was in the headlines for the wrong reasons. In 2003, Ernie was arrested and charged with DUI and vehicular homicide after a tragic accident. His blood alcohol level was 0.1, well above the legal limit. The crash resulted in the death of another driver. Ernie pleaded not guilty to the homicide charge, and the victim's widow chose not to press further. Still, the DUI charge stood. For Loretta, the situation was devastating. She rarely spoke about it publicly, but her silence spoke volumes. She had already lost 2 children. She couldn't bear to lose another to poor choices or public disgrace. Over time, Ernie worked to rebuild his life. In 2020, he and his wife Crystal renewed their vows, and Loretta was there to celebrate. She posted, "Marriage isn't always easy. Heck, it's not even always pretty, but love holds you together." It was a moment of peace, a sign that the family had weathered yet another storm. Ernie may have made mistakes, but he also showed that redemption was possible. Like Loretta's music, his journey was full of pain, beauty, and second chances. Through heartache and hardship, Loretta never stopped loving her children. And each one brought their own story, some joyful, others marked by struggle. But her next daughter, Sissy, brought a sense of pride and celebration that stood out. She followed in her mother's footsteps in every way and helped preserve the family's musical legacy. Sissy Lynn, Clara Marie Lynn, known lovingly as Sissy, was born on April 7, 1952. Her birth certificate didn't even have a name for 4 years because her father, Doolittle Lynn, refused to be rushed by the hospital nurse into naming her before leaving. Eventually, she was named after Loretta's own mother, but Sissy grew into a child who didn't need a name to shine. Loretta called her smart, pleasant, and a perfect child. Unlike her older siblings, whose births brought uncertainty, Sissy came into a more stable home, one where Loretta was finding her footing as a country music star. As she grew up, Sissy naturally gravitated toward music. She toured with her husband, John Beams, opening for country legends like Conway Twitty and George Jones. Loretta admired her daughter's strength and showmanship. "She stole my dance," Loretta once joked, clearly proud of the spirit Sissy brought to the stage. In 2011, Loretta produced an album of her daughter's performances, a first in her career. That move wasn't just a family collaboration, it was a moment of passing the torch. Beyond music, Sissy proved to be a dedicated entrepreneur and community figure. In 2006, she opened Sissy's Country Store and Music Barn across the street from Loretta's ranch in Hurricane Mills, Tennessee. The venue wasn't just a business, it was a tribute to her family. It showcased signed albums, country memorabilia, and a stage for live music. Visitors raved about the shop, and Sissy turned it into a heartfelt museum of memories. She made sure her mother's legacy had a physical home that fans could walk through, touch, and feel. Though not without her own challenges, Sissy has managed to live a life centered on creativity, stability, and service to her roots. She's one of the few Lynn children who has stayed relatively out of headlines for tragedy. Her journey has been about honoring the past while building a future that makes space for joy. "My children and grandchildren will know their mama did this," she once said of her music. In a family marked by sorrow, Sissy's chapter is a breath of hope. While Sissy brought comfort and celebration into the family, Loretta's next pregnancy brought uncertainty. She was already a rising star, and the idea of more children scared her. But life had other plans. What she didn't expect was not just one more baby, but 2. And those twins would go on to carry the family's music into a new generation. Peggy and Patsy Lynn. In 1964, Loretta Lynn received shocking news. She wasn't just pregnant, she was carrying twins. At the time, she was already gaining fame as a singer and feared the growing demands of motherhood would hold her back. "Gee, I hope it ain't twins again," she later joked in her song One's on the Way, a humorous but honest take on motherhood. On August 6, 1964, she gave birth to 2 daughters, Patsy and Peggy, named after her late friend Patsy Cline and her sister Peggy Sue. Growing up, the twins didn't see their mom as a struggling homemaker. They saw her as a superstar. From a young age, they were backstage, watching their mother perform for thousands. Eventually, they formed a musical duo known as the Lynns. Without using their famous last name for leverage, they signed with Warner Brothers Records on their own merit. Their hit Woman to Woman reached the country charts, and in 1998 and 1999, they were nominated for CMA's Best Vocal Duo. Patsy leaned toward music production and studio work, while Peggy loved writing and performing. "We needed the yin and the yang," Patsy explained. Their unique strengths complemented each other, but it was Patsy who ended up producing several of her mother's final albums, including Wouldn't It Be Great, which earned a Grammy nomination, and Still Woman Enough in 2021. She worked alongside John Carter Cash, son of Johnny and June. It was a full-circle moment. Country legacy families coming together to make something timeless. Though they achieved commercial success, what mattered most to the twins was keeping their mother's legacy alive with respect and care. "She didn't want to be Loretta Lynn when she walked in the house," Patsy said. "She wanted to be a mom." That balance between legendary artist and loving mother defined their relationship. And in honoring that, Patsy and Peggy became more than just daughters. They became part of Loretta's artistic voice. Peggy and Patsy kept Loretta's music alive in the studio. But one of Loretta's deepest joys was watching her grandchildren grow. That joy, however, came with more heartbreak. Her first granddaughter, Lynn Massey, was more than just family. She was part of the third generation touched by tragedy in a story that seemed to echo through time. Lynn Massey. Lynn Massey was Loretta Lynn's first granddaughter, born to Betty Sue. Named in honor of her grandmother, Lynn was a bright light in the family. Loretta adored her, and their bond was tight. Photos of them together show warmth and pride. Lynn often standing beside her grandmother at the ranch, backstage at concerts, or at family events. She was always there, quietly carrying the family legacy. But life was not easy for Lynn. She suffered from chronic health problems for years, though much of her battle was kept private. In August 2024, Lynn passed away at the age of 59 after what the family called a long and difficult health journey. Loretta, who had already buried two of her children, now faced the unimaginable pain of losing her first grandchild. Though Loretta had passed in 2022, the family felt the blow just as deeply, and fans mourned alongside them. Tributes poured in across social media. "She was strong, kind, and full of grace," read one family post. Another relative called her the quiet heartbeat of the family. Lynn had grown up surrounded by fame, but never sought the spotlight. Her life was about closeness, not crowds. She helped care for Loretta in her later years, and some say she was her grandmother's shadow, always nearby, quietly supportive. Lynn's death marked yet another chapter in a story filled with loss. 3 generations now carried the weight of early death. First Jack, then Betty Sue, now Lynn. Each time, the pain hit just as hard. But through it all, the family remained close. As Sissy once said, "We've lost a lot, but we love harder because of it." Lynn Massey may not have made headlines like the others, but her story is no less heartbreaking or powerful. Lynn's death reminded the world that the Lynn family legacy comes with both beauty and sorrow. But she wasn't the only grandchild lost too soon. Loretta's grandson, Jeffrey Allen, Jack's son, followed a similar tragic path, and his story would strike another devastating chord in a family already stretched thin by grief. Jeffrey Allen Lynn. Jeffrey Allen Lynn was Loretta Lynn's grandson, the son of Jack Benny Lynn. Just like his father, Jeffrey had a quiet strength and a natural connection to the land. He grew up around horses, hard work, and music. While he never sought out the stage like some of his cousins, he was proud of his family roots and deeply respected the Lynn legacy. Friends described him as soft-spoken, loyal, and grounded in tradition. Sadly, Jeffrey's life ended far too soon. In June 2016, he was found dead at his home in Waverly, Tennessee. He was just 47 years old. No foul play was suspected, but the details were kept largely private by the family. The news came as a shock, another sudden death in a family already marked by deep loss. Loretta, who had buried his father decades earlier, now had to bury her grandson too. "He was such a good boy," she said quietly at the time. "He reminded me of Jack." Jeffrey had 3 children of his own, and his passing left behind a void that could not be filled. The community mourned his death, with friends and relatives remembering his kindness and his love for family. Though he wasn't a celebrity or a performer, his absence was felt just as strongly. For Loretta, it wasn't about fame, it was about blood. Losing him felt like losing her son all over again. This pattern of children and grandchildren dying far too young became a cruel echo in Loretta's life. Each time she lost one of them, the pain didn't get easier. It got heavier. She once said, "You don't ever get over losing a child or grandchild. You just learn to live around the hole in your heart." With Jeffrey's passing, that hole only grew larger. Jeffrey Allen's death was another deep cut in a family already scarred by loss. And while some of Loretta's grandchildren faced quieter battles, the broader family tree was full of life and pain. Many of her grandchildren carried the family's musical spirit, while others struggled in the shadows. And through it all, Loretta tried to keep them close, no matter the cost. Other grandchildren, Loretta Lynn, had a total of 26 grandchildren, and they each carried a piece of her in them, whether through talent, temperament, or the unmistakable sparkle of resilience. While many stayed out of the spotlight, several embraced music, just like their grandmother. Most notably, Emmy Russell, Patsy Lynn's daughter, stepped into the national spotlight with her appearance on American Idol, where she reached the top 5 in 2024. Emmy said in an interview, "My grandma always told me, sing like it's your last song. That's how you make people feel something." Not all grandchildren sought fame. Many worked behind the scenes, on the ranch, in the family business, or quietly preserving memorabilia from Loretta's incredible career. Holidays became big family reunions at Hurricane Mills, where music, grief, and laughter mixed like old friends. Loretta cherished those moments. "Family is everything," she would often say. "They are my greatest treasure." Still, not all stories were filled with joy. Some grandchildren struggled with health, addiction, or the weight of growing up in such a famous bloodline. While Loretta never spoke publicly about those battles, family insiders have said she worked tirelessly behind the scenes to help. Whether it was paying for rehab, supporting young mothers, or simply being a listening ear, she made sure they knew she was there. Even in her final years, Loretta was committed to her family's legacy. She encouraged her grandchildren to tell their stories, to write songs, and to speak their truth, even if it wasn't easy. "Your voice is your power," she told Emmy, "and you got that from me." The Lynn grandchildren inherited more than a last name. They inherited a legacy shaped by loss, love, and the kind of strength that only hardship can teach. As her grandchildren grew into their own, Loretta found comfort in watching them blossom. But the shadows of the past were never far behind. The loss of Betty Sue, Jack, Jeffrey, and Lynn Massey left a pain that wouldn't go away. Through it all, Loretta carried her grief quietly, but it always found its way into her voice, her lyrics, and her soul. Loretta's grief over time. Grief didn't visit Loretta Lynn just once. It came again and again. The death of Betty Sue in 2013 was especially cruel. Betty had been her first child, her songwriting companion, her emotional twin. "She made me a mom first," Loretta wrote. "Sometimes it seemed like we were raising each other. Losing her wasn't just about death. It was about losing a part of herself that couldn't be replaced." Then there was Jack. His death in 1984 was the kind that comes like a bolt of lightning, fast, senseless, and final. Loretta wasn't even home. She was in the hospital recovering from tour exhaustion when she got the call. "I didn't believe it," she once said. "I thought someone had made a mistake." But it wasn't a mistake. And for 37 years, she missed him every single day. She kept posting tributes, writing messages, and revisiting memories, as if he were still right there. The deaths of her grandson Jeffrey in 2016 and granddaughter Lynn Massey in 2024 reopened old wounds. It was a painful reminder that grief doesn't stop with one generation. Loretta saw history repeating itself, and it hurt. But she never allowed grief to harden her. Instead, she used it to deepen her art. "I don't cry when I think of them. I smile," she once posted. "I sure do miss them, though." What made Loretta's grief different was how she carried it. Quietly, honestly, without turning bitter. She poured it into her music. Songs like "Wouldn't It Be Great" and "Miss Being Mrs." weren't just hits. They were love letters to people she missed. For Loretta, grief was a lifelong companion, but she made it something beautiful. "I've had a lot of hard times," she once said, "but I'd do it all again. I've loved hard, and I've lived full." Loretta never ran from pain. She turned it into poetry. But her heartbreak didn't just shape her as a woman. It shaped her as an artist. The losses of her children and grandchildren didn't silence her. They gave her songs their soul. And in the next chapter, we'll explore how grief became one of the most powerful tools in her songwriting legacy. How grief shaped her songs. Loretta Lynn didn't just sing about heartbreak. She lived it. Every tragedy in her family became a thread in the fabric of her music. When Betty Sue passed, Loretta paid tribute with a private show at her ranch. But the real mourning came later, in the form of lyrics. "When you sing from the truth," she once said, "people feel it like it's their own story." That's why her fans cried when she sang about loss. It wasn't just showbiz, it was real. After Jack's drowning in 1984, Loretta took a long pause from touring. The stage that once felt like home now reminded her of what she couldn't bring back. But when she returned, her voice had changed. Lower, slower, more emotional. Critics called it the second voice of Loretta Lynn, filled with wisdom and sorrow. Songs like "Miss Being Mrs." and "Wouldn't It Be Great" were reflections of that grief. They weren't written to chart. They were written to heal. From her early heartbreaks to her final recordings, Loretta's music became a mirror for her emotional life. But her legacy wasn't built on pain alone. It was built on resilience. Even after burying 2 children and 2 grandchildren, she kept showing up for her fans and family. And that quiet strength was never more visible than in her final years. Loretta's final years. In the years before her death, Loretta Lynn stepped back from the spotlight, but not from the world. Even after a 2017 stroke and a fall in 2018, she continued recording music, sharing memories online, and hosting intimate gatherings at her ranch in Hurricane Mills. "I might be slower," she joked, "but I'm still singing." Fans still came from across the country to see her. some just hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who changed country music. Her health may have slowed her body, but not her spirit. Loretta posted frequent tributes on Instagram, honoring her children, thanking fans, and reflecting on life's chapters. "God's been good to me," she wrote once. "Even when it hurt, He never left me." Her messages were part prayer, part poetry, and all heart. And through every word, you could hear the voice of a woman who had lived deeply, loved fiercely, and survived more than most. Loretta's passing didn't just mark the end of a career, it closed a generational book of joy, pain, and profound endurance. But as with any great story, the echoes don't stop at the final page. Her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren carry on the rhythm. And that leads us to the question, what can we take from all this loss and all this strength? What the Lynn family taught us. The story of Loretta Lynn's family is more than just music and tragedy. It's about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of unconditional love. Through the deaths of Jack, Betty Sue, Jeffrey, and Lynn Massey, the Lynn family showed us what it means to grieve openly, to keep loving after loss, and to rise each. Time life knocks you down. "We've been through a lot," Sissy once said, "but Mama always taught us to get back up." They also taught us that fame doesn't protect you from heartbreak. Loretta was a household name, but pain doesn't care about celebrity. She buried 2 children and outlived 2 grandchildren, yet she kept showing up, on stage, in the studio, and at home. Her strength wasn't in hiding the pain, it was in holding it close and still choosing to sing. That's a lesson every fan can carry. As the spotlight dims and the headlines fade, one thing remains clear. The Lynn family story is far from over. From sorrow came song, and from song came strength. Loretta's children may have lived in her shadow, but they also lived in her light. And now, it's time to reflect on what this all means, and what's next for the family left behind. A legacy beyond the music. Loretta Lynn's life was a country ballad, filled with heartbreak, survival, and more love than most people ever know. Her children lived through poverty, fame, tragedy, and triumph. And while some left this world too soon, their stories continue to shape how we remember Loretta, not just as a star, but as a mother, grandmother, and matriarch of a family that refused to break. Her daughter Betty Sue made her a mother. Jack made her a protector. Her grandchildren, like Jeffrey and Lynn Massey, made her a legacy. And through it all, Loretta kept singing. Not because she had to, but because she needed to. Her songs were never just melodies. They were messages to her children, to her fans, and to herself. "I sang to survive," she once said, and survive she did. Now, the Lynn family stands at a crossroads. With Loretta gone, it's up to her daughters and grandchildren to carry the torch. And they are. Emmy Russell is recording music. Patsy continues producing. Sissy keeps the ranch alive. The next generation is stepping forward, not to copy Loretta, but to honor her in their own ways. So, what happened to Loretta Lynn's daughter is heartbreaking. But what's even more powerful is what happened next. The love, the songs, the strength. They didn't end. They just changed shape. And through each of them, Loretta lives on. Her voice may be gone, but her legacy echoes louder than ever. If you were moved by this story, share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of Loretta's journey touched you the most? And if you want more heartfelt stories like this one, Subscribe, like, and hit the bell icon, because next time we're peeling back the curtain on another legend, and the truth may surprise you.